Welcome to Families in Crisis, de-escalating the conflict. Every family will have crisis points along the way, and we're going to describe crisis here in just a little bit. And the skills that I want to introduce to you in this presentation can be very helpful. Now, if you're a family that has a lot of crises that's going on, it will be important for you to get some training on what you can do in order to manage some of the crisis that's going on. Now, I want to remind you that there are also two circles. There is the circle of control, which is the circle that you can actually manage and create consequences in and help a child to move forward. And then there's a circle of concern. And the circle of concern means that you don't really have any control anyway. You see, our children are going to make their own decisions when it comes down to it. So your circle of control can be, we're going to set up the house so that if somebody yells, "I hate you," that there will be a consequence associated with that because you can control that consequence, but you cannot control what comes out of your children's mouths. And so what comes out of their mouths is a circle of concern that you have to counsel them with and support them and listen to them and have them get their anxieties, their pressures out. But you can certainly create for them this grace environment that has these parameters, these boundaries that has some consequences associated with it. And what we're going to talk about in this presentation is what do you do when children get really angry and mouthy and frustrated? And what do you do if they start throwing things or breaking things? And I want to use for you some information from the Crisis Prevention Institute that is really, really helpful and direct you to that institute for additional information on what you might want to do to manage crisis points when they become very severe within your own family. So let's pray. Lord, bless us with wisdom and guidance to know what we can do in order to help people to move forward in learning and growing and developing through conflict and through crises. Lord, keep us safe by also giving us wisdom to know what to do and what not to do, as well as help our children to not have to get to the point where they get so frustrated. But we know that some will. Sometimes our children will just become so frustrated that they impulsively throw something. Or if we have adopted children, or if we are fostering children, many of them come to us already with some trauma. And as a result, that trauma is going to leak out sideways. And help for us, Lord, to manage those situations well. In Jesus' name, amen. So a crisis occurs when people experience a time of intense struggle or difficulty. And what I want to say is that crises are individual. Just because somebody has an intense struggle or difficulty doesn't mean that they won't have the emotional or social skills or the support that they need in order to deal with it. It's when you don't have all of those supports in place, or you're not sure what to do and you get really frustrated and you run with that feeling, or if your body chemistry goes and you feel like you need to respond by fighting or respond by yelling to whatever is going on, that you're going to need a specific skill set. So we're going to talk about what these skill sets are and how you can think through your own response when your children are screaming, yelling, biting, hitting, throwing things. So you have the Crisis Prevention Institute website right here, and I would encourage you to check out their material and any training that they have, as well as any others before you make a final decision, and see whether or not this information would be helpful to you. Talk about this idea of a crisis and its development of a crisis. So, number one, there are four levels of crisis development. The first is anxiety. And everybody has a baseline behavior. And if there's too much activity, too much language, too much intensity, people would be anxious or there's more pressure on them. If there's too little and people back off, then we know that there is pressure on them as well. So if you have a really boisterous, noisy, happy-go-lucky child who all of a sudden is very, very quiet, anxiety. If you have a real quiet kid and all of a sudden that kid becomes kind of crabby and irritable, anxiety. And what we want to note is that there are activities and things that you can do that will be very helpful with this. And the first is that you need to be supportive of that person. And so you're going to be non-judgmental and empathetic, and you're going to want them to tell you what's going on inside. So if you see that somebody's being really crabby and they're not normally crabby, you can say, it really seems to me that right now there just seems to be something that's really irritating you. Can you pinpoint it and tell me what it is? And they may go blah 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 blah. And all you're doing is you want to get that out. You don't want to attack it. You don't want to argue. You just want to get it out. Think of it as like a pus pocket. And you just need to stab that pus pocket, squeeze out that pus pocket, clean it out, and things will be a lot better. If this is all that you need to do, it's an amazing day. Because people have to get that anger out, that frustration out, and do that in an environment where people don't have to worry about whether or not they're going to be accepted. So this is non-judgmental. It's empathetic. People can say whatever they need to say, and what will often happen is that they will calm down. I mean, how many times do people say to you, "Oh man, thanks so much for just listening and helping me out," and all you did was give an opportunity to say what's going on the inside. The second thing that can happen in the development of a crisis is that people will become defensive. And so they're going to begin to have these behaviors, these escalating verbal behaviors that will challenge who you are, and they're going to begin to lose rational thought. Now, what begins to happen is that people have this emotional spike inside of them. Your brain has a rational area and it has an emotional area. And when somebody feels threatened or when somebody is under a lot of pressure, the emotional area tends to take over. The emotional area responds in less than 1 second, and the rational area responds in about 6 seconds. And so you can see that somebody who just is real impulsive and just says something when they feel the pressure is operating out of their emotional area. And their emotional area is just going to say something that makes sense to them in the moment that might really not be logical or make sense at all. I mean, how many times have you actually heard somebody say, "Man, I wish I wouldn't have said that because I don't even know why I said that"? Well, they said it because they were frustrated or upset or really anxious or had it with something, and they were in this defensive stage. And this defensive stage is the stage where they begin to lose rationality and they cannot predict where somebody is at and what's actually happening inside of them. So you want to be directive as a parent, as a caregiver, be directive, and you want to give control by setting limits. And so we'll talk about that with the verbal escalation continuum coming up. You want to give options and choices so that people can gain control through appropriate self-directed behavior. You want to catch it before it escalates into some kind of a physical altercation where they're stomping or throwing things or throwing themselves on the ground or hitting somebody in some way. And so you're going to tell them, here's something that you can do. And at the end of this directive stage, there's a counseling stage that comes to that, which is going to be really great, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. Well, if stage one and stage two don't work, then you have what's called the acting out person. And this is an individual who loses rationality and loses control. This is a person who just can't think through what's actually going on. And as a result, they're impulsive, they're saying things they don't mean, they're acting in ways that they don't mean, and sometimes they can't even remember it. They're not able to project onto somebody else what this feels like because right now they're in so much pain or so much turmoil or so much agitation that they're just saying something and the other person doesn't even know what to do with it. And as a result of that, um, the acting out person needs to have some sort of nonviolent physical crisis intervention. And I want you to know that it is not the purpose of this presentation to even begin to look at what that takes. You need to be trained if you feel like you need to put your hands on somebody and keep them from hurting themselves or somebody else. Because when you move towards somebody who is in this third stage, they're going to see that movement as an act of hostility because they're not thinking rational. What happens is people need about 25 feet of personal space when they reach this point. So if you're within 25 feet and you make a move toward them, they're going to react as though you are going to hit them, hurt them, damage them in some way. And as a result of that, they're going to accuse you of doing something inappropriate to them. So you have to be ready to manage this third stage. So I don't ever recommend that unless you've had any training at all, you never put your hands on an angry trying to do is lead them somewhere else. And so what I suggest, if you don't have this training, is get in a conversation with them and then you move them through that conversation to wherever you want them to be. So if you need to move them to your bed, to the bedroom, then you, if you can, you talk with them and say, hey, I need you to come into the bedroom so we can leave the living room and have a more private conversation. And you begin walking to the bedroom. And then you say, hey, I really want you to come over here and let's just kind of have a little bit of space with this, and let them, if they will, follow you to the bedroom. They might not. They might just stay there. They might just pout. If they don't do anything and they're just right there, then get rid of everybody else around them and let them just stay where they are. Because if they throw themselves on the ground and you all leave, then they don't have an audience. And you could just kind of stand off in a corner and make sure everything is okay, but let the whole family leave. Remember, it's a crisis situation. This is not normal. And you need to get through the crisis to where it's more normal. And then you have to talk about this behavior so that your teenager or whoever it is, maybe it's a younger child, will know what to do the next time that level of emotion comes to play. Now, at the end of all of this, you're going to have what's called tension reduction. And this is where somebody has a great big sigh at the end, and there's a decrease in energy level, both physically and emotionally, and they're going to begin to have control. Now, this is when you have what's called therapeutic rapport, where you begin to reestablish communication and you regain trust. This is where counseling takes place. So take a look at this. You've got anxiety, which you want to take a hold of through supportive stances, through asking for more information, by not doing anything that makes them feel threatened. When they hit the defensive stance, that they're not going to really be able to listen to you very much, and you have to give them some kind of control to say, hey, you can do this, you can go here, but you've got to set some limits for them because they may hear those limits and be able to move forward. And then you've got the acting out person. This is the person that is throwing themselves on the floor or doing something that's going to be more damaging to property. And then you have the opportunity for counseling. So let's explore some of these. Let's take a look at this verbal escalation continuum, which is in the defensive stage. And what I want you to know is that if I refer to this as the kite drawing, it's because it looks like one. But I want you to think that there are arrows all around these lines of the kite. The outline of the kite in the center is that you can jump around from these various stages. But we're going to start with the least difficult stage and go to the most difficult stage of a verbal conflict. So the least difficult stage is questioning, and there are two kinds of questions. The first question is an information seeking question, and you want to just answer that. So if you tell your teenager, hey, it's going to be time for dinner pretty soon, and your teenager goes, wow, well, I'm in the middle of a game. How many more minutes do I have? You just want to say, we're going to eat in 15 minutes. Just answer the question because they feel frustrated that they're in the middle of a game and they might not be able to finish the level or something that's going on. The challenge question basically is, well, who do you think you are? Why are you bothering me? Can't you see that I'm busy? And you can ignore it, you can redirect it, or you can just go ahead and set limits. So when you ignore it, you're just going to absorb it, and you're going to say, hey, I know that you're really frustrated. You can redirect them to simply say, hey, I just want you to know, I just want to remind you, we're going to be eating pretty soon. And you can set some limits. So let's talk about limit setting. If you've got somebody who is refusing to do something, you set limits that are clear, reasonable, simple, and enforceable. Because you don't want to say things like, well, if you don't come to dinner tonight, I'm so tired of fighting this with you, you're going to be grounded from playing your game for a month. I mean, now the parent is out of control. Now the parent is playing a power play, and we know that that's not going to work. And what you want to do is set some clear, reasonable, simple, and enforceable limits to simply say, hey, here's some things then. If you can finish this level and you can join us at dinner, but this is the last time. Or you could just simply say to somebody who's playing a game, you know that we're going to be eating at 6. So you got to watch your game. So you might want to set a household time where everybody has to be free at 6. Whether you eat at 6 or you eat at 6:15 or you eat at 6:30, somewhere right around that time, you need to make sure that by 6 o'clock, everybody knows that that's between 6 and 7, that's family time, and you don't do something else. And that's when we're going to eat, we're just going to chill, and we're going to talk, we're going to do something. And if somebody's like, I'm not going to do that, then clear, reasonable, simple, and enforceable limits need to be put in place. Well, since you know that we're going to be doing this, then we're going to have to talk about what what kinds of consequences might happen. So I just want you to know we're going to be eating in about 15 minutes. You can join us or not, but if you don't join us, then we're going to have to figure out what some of these consequences are. And what your sons or daughters might say is, well, what's the consequence going to be? And say, well, I always like to tell people, well, I hope that you don't choose that we go down that route, but we'll have to figure it out if you do. So refusal, overt noncompliance. If you got somebody who needs to do a chore and they need to pick up their room, and they just need to do it now because they put it off. Clear, reasonable, simple, and enforceable limits are: you're not going to be able to have your friends over. You're not going to be able to watch Netflix. You're not going to be able to watch any kind of video until your room is clear. That's clean. It's clear, reasonable, simple, and it's enforceable. So number two is really hard because you have to be mindful that this is a logical consequences. This is simple consequences. What happens when people hit the um, non-rational stage is that you have to use more simple and easy to understand language, because the more complex it is, the harder it is to understand, just because somebody is getting more defensive. It's not that you're talking down to people, it's just that you're trying to be really simple and clear. This third is this what's called verbal release, the loss of verbal control. This is where somebody yells. And I want you to think of this as a high to low to a high to low to a high to a low to a high to a low. And that's where you want to allow venting. That's the high. And what I want you to know is that when I do this in class, I'll ask a student to come up and just start yelling. And now it's really weird, of course, to be yelling at the prof, but here's generally what happens. And when I've trained this before, this is what happens: is somebody can yell, and then they get done yelling and they look at me. Now, that then is the trough. That's the down part. That's when I want to speak. And so when you're dealing with an out of control teenager or an out of control child, they're going to yell at you for a little bit, and then they're going to quit and they're going to look at you. If you try to talk to them while they're yelling, that is fuel on the fire. So you're going to just allow for them to vent and say something. You want to make sure that you remove the audience so that there's not people watching, because they might need to save face. You want to focus on safety, look around to make sure that everything is okay from a safe standpoint. Like there's nothing that could be thrown at anybody, that the teenager basically is really safe. Nobody's going to jump in and try to make it worse, which would make it horrible, as you found out from the last time. Anytime anyone comes in to somebody who is starting to head toward acting out, it just makes them more jittery, and you just really want to listen to what's going on. So you want to try to use a supportive position here and hear what's going on, but you talk to them in the low spot. Now, when somebody is really, really out of control, I like to ask a nonsensical question just to see if they're even with me or not. And a nonsensical question, I mean, is a question that doesn't fit what's going on. So if somebody's screaming and yelling what a horrible parent you are, or you're not the real parent because you're the step parent, you never loved them anyway, and you just wish that they never married your mom or your dad. When they're done with all of that offensive, now remember, you need to know this is designed to hurt you. You can't take it personally. And when it comes on down, you look at them and say, I have been wondering, I really want to make everybody's favorite dessert sometime this week, but I'm really trying to debate if I've got your favorite dessert right. So could you tell me what your favorite dessert is again? And what you're trying to do is break the yell. That's all you're trying to do. You've got to have a skill set here, or else you're going to just fall into this swirling anger that's actually going on. And you're going to be swooped up in it, and you're going to say things that you're going to regret. You've got to bring the end of this. And I like to ask a question out of context because it lets me know how far gone somebody is. So if somebody just keeps yelling through that, then I know that I'm heading toward just needing to make sure that I allow for this to run its course. I can't really break it in some way. And what I want to do, I don't want to offend anybody, but I just want to say, hey, I want to talk about that, but I also want to talk about this. So here's what you're saying. But I also want you to know that, I do love you and I do care about you, and I really want to put something together for all of us, and maybe it'd be great to start with you. So you want to allow this loss of verbal control, but you don't want to be face to face with them. You actually want to be standing sideways as much as possible. You want to be skinnier, smaller, which makes you less threatening. If you stand face to face, that often is interpreted as an aggressive posture. The fourth area is the worst, which is intimidation and threats. You got to take it seriously. You got to get help. Somebody threatens you in some way, even if they don't mean it. You got to take it seriously. They might do something different than what they actually set out to do, but you've got to get some help. You've got to talk to another adult. You've got to pull in some people to help you to deal with this intimidation. And then the last is this therapeutic rapport, which we're going to talk about coming up here. This is where you provide counseling for them. So this verbal escalation continuum is really important. But remember, you can start with questioning and then go right to screaming. You could start with screaming and then go to number two. You could go to number two and then hit intimidation and threats. But you need to have a certain kind of skill set for each of these. So take a look again at this slide presentation and see what some of these skill sets are that you need to have, and maybe get some help and some training if this really is something that unfortunately might be a part of your family experience with your students. So the first is that you want to listen and talk less, speak softly, respect privacy, and remain calm as much as possible. And you don't want to do things that would embarrass them, have them lose their face by calling them out in front of others. You don't want to be criticizing them because it just adds fuel to the fire. You don't want to overreact to what's going on. You don't want to do anything that would make them feel worse or like you don't care. So you don't want to use sarcasm, and you don't want to pretend like you're paying attention to them when you're not. So for you as an adult, here are some elements for you is that you have the fear of the unknown, like what is happening and what's going to happen, and anxiety of the fear of the known is, can I actually handle this? So you're going to have your senses are going to go up because you're going to have this adrenaline that's going to go through you. You're going to have this cortisol, the stress chemical. You're going to act faster. You're going to think faster. You might actually go into a defensive mode really quick. And so if you don't know what you want to say, then just listen, which is going to be really good. Your unproductive is that you could just lock up and not know what to say and feel like you can't really do anything because it's happening so much. You could get really confused on what to do. You could overreact and yell or put your hands on somebody or grab somebody, or you could do some other kind of inappropriate response. So you want to really understand what your fears are. You want to learn techniques. You want to get support and have other people that help you in some way. And if you need to, you need to learn physical intervention skills in order to deal with what's actually going on. So as we take a look at debriefing, there are the coping acrostic that I introduced to you before, but this is where it comes in. At the end of the verbal escalation continuum, and when the entire conflict is over, this is what you do, is that you make sure that you are in control, and you want to make sure that the child is in control. So it might be several minutes, might be an hour before you guys are actually ready to have a conversation. When you listen to the acting out person or you listen to the other person yourself, is that you want to orient yourself to the facts. You just want to look to see what actually happened. You don't want to look at what you think happened. You don't want to look at what other people think has happened. You want to just have this person say, this is what occurred. You want to look at the facts. You want to listen to the words and what happened, not to punish, but to understand so that somebody could find better words if they don't have it. You also want to look at patterns. You want to be able to see if this happens on a regular basis. Does it pressure build up and then somebody screams and yells? Do people have a grumpier time in the morning when they've been up late at night? If somebody is not eating regular meals or not exercising in regular ways, does that make them more irritable? If somebody says something in a particular way or doesn't respond in a right way to somebody, are they so sensitive about that response? I'm not throwing stones here, but is somebody sensitive about that that they get really, really angry? Patterns. And then you want to investigate all your options, what you can do, talk about all those options and try to reach an agreement through negotiation where everybody has a win-win. Everybody moves forward and says, I feel good about this. It's not where we want to go, but here's one step in the right direction because you're trying to gain a new perspective. Remember, if you listen to the previous presentation on parenting teenagers, you need a new perspective. This is how you get it. This coping acrostic is how you get a new perspective after an explosive event. And then give means now you give encouragement. Now you give counsel. Now you, when somebody is finally calmed down, now you can give a hug. Now you can pray with somebody. Now you can tell somebody how much you love and care about them because they're more willing to listen at this point in time. I know this was a really fast presentation, but I hope that you can see the value of having some kind of a program like this so that in your own family, or if you're working with other people's children, or if you're in a facility where you need to have this, or in a public school, that you would know that there is a way that you can work with people through some of their most difficult moments and do that in such a way that you know you are doing something really, really good.